Brasilia, which is going down on Saturday night, Pete. You know, it was a fight card that we did not know whether it was going to happen, but as of right now, here Thursday night at 7:30 Eastern time, it's happening.
Yeah, I know, crazy. Crazy events have unfolded between all the big major sports, MLB, NBA. You even think about NASCAR next weekend and everything. So craziness has ensued, and surprisingly, the fights are still going on. But who knows if that's going to change? But I'm sure you have some info for us.
Of course, we want to give a special shout out to Super Draft for sponsoring the show, and they will be back soon. Of course, we all know what's going on in the sports world with the coronavirus, and MMA is happening. You know, the UFC on Saturday, Friday, right in Pete's backyard at the Mohegan Sun. Bellator's doing a show. No fans will be in the building. There's going to be under 250 people. When you talk about, you know, people working the event, you know, from the commission side of it, fighters, coaches, production team, whatnot. And that seems to be the same case with the UFC. The UFC, one of the weirdest parts about this, Pete, is the fact that they've not put out a statement, but as of right now, that's I know Guilherme Cruz at MMA Fighting had put some stuff out there, so this is going to happen. Before we kind of get into the fights, of course, we're going to break down all these salaries. We're going to go through our tiers at the end of the show. I want to touch on two things with you. Since you're the fighter, you can bring a fighter's perspective. Anthony Rocco Martin, of course, a UFC welterweight, he put this tweet out earlier today where he said, I would bet more than half of the fighters would expose themselves to coronavirus before not getting to fight. We aren't union and don't get paid to not fight. Most spend all their money getting to their next fight. You're the fighter. How would you how do you have a similar opinions that Rocco Martin has?
I understand what he's saying. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but in a situation with this magnitude, you'd hope that maybe the UFC or Bellator would step in and kind of alleviate the problem a little bit, and maybe err on the side of caution and maybe give them their show money. And I know that's a lot asking for a company, but that's the issue with fighting is, that's why you always have to make weight, and then you always want to try your best to make it to the fight, because we don't get paid so much. I mean, the top level is great, but besides the top level, it's usually like a paycheck to paycheck type of thing. So fight camp to fight camp. I totally understand what he's saying, and as as bad as you want that money, in your bank account, you also want that W too. So some people are coming off of losses, and you think of all the time that they put into the training camp and how they really want to go out there and show off all the hard work, and maybe they want to entertain the fans that are at home. So I get what he's saying, and I do understand it. And it's going to be definitely interesting that they're going to have the fights carry out, but with an empty arena. I mean, it's going to remind me of like the Ultimate Fighter a little bit, where you're just hearing the floorboards and it's pretty quiet besides that. So very interested to see how this all unfolds for sure.
Fighting an empty arena, that's going to be kind of the interesting story, not just in both MMA events we have this weekend, but of course we're here to talk about the UFC fight card. And I've talked to fighters who've been on Dana White's Contender Series, who have fought in the UFC Apex or the old Tough Gym, or the Ultimate Fighter Gym, where of course all the seasons of the Ultimate Fighter took place. From a fighting aspect,
Hmm.
you always hear fighters and coaches talk about code words. Do you think that they're now changing up these code words because everyone's going to hear exactly everything?
No, I would say for the most part, it's going to be business as usual for the corners and the fighters. What it's going to feel like, it's going to be a big, drastic change. It's going to feel a little bit more like practice, or early on in your career when you're fighting your way up to these major organizations, when there probably wasn't too much attendance and there wasn't too much hype and all the lights and the crowd involved. So I think it's going to be like a little surreal and a little reminiscent of when they were, early on in their careers. I think with the cornermen, I mean, you should be listening to your coaches, not necessarily so much on your opponent's coaches, because you never know what's really, being, deceiving, or trying to throw you off your game. And, there's a bunch of tricks in this game. And sometimes you could be calling out things just so your opponent starts to think of it, when in reality you weren't even, going for that offensive move. So, like I said, man, this is crazy. This is the craziest day in sports and in the world for me, besides 9/11 for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those events we're all going to remember. Look, I remember 9/11. I remember going to work and getting and literally getting the phone call of everything that happened. There's just certain days in your life you'll always remember. But of course, we are here to talk about UFC Brasilia. If you do have any questions, leave it in the chat here on YouTube. If you're listening on watching on YouTube, be sure to hit that thumbs up. And of course, this show is always on the Awesemo podcast channel. So be sure to subscribe, rate, and review to get all the great product here from awesemo.com. But Pete, main event is a lightweight matchup. Kevin Lee, 8,300, taking on Charles Oliveira, 7,900. Of course, Kevin Lee, is a guy that's been around, been a ton of tough fights, has been right there, in the mix. They're one of the top 5 lightweights in the UFC. Charles Oliveira, of course, has had a problem with weights in the issue at 45. That's why he's now at 55, and he has been a DraftKings stud. But the one thing that you will sit back and go is he's not fought the type of competition that Kevin Lee has fought. I believe Kevin Lee is the more complete, well-rounded fighter. To me, he has just got to weather that 5-minute early storm that he is going to get from Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, this fight is extremely interesting, and I'm pretty surprised with the pricing. 8,300 for Kevin Lee and 7,900 for Charles Oliveira. The value is there for both of them, and you talk about great DFS performers for sure. And Charles Oliveira has been a stud. He's a finisher, so he hunts submissions, he hunts for body shots, he hunts to try to end the fight quickly. So that's usually what you want in your lineup. A bit of an undersized 55er, in my opinion, now, compared to some of the guys like Kevin Lee, where I think Kevin Lee can really outmuscle him and put that pressure on him. And in the past, we have seen Charles Oliveira fold to that pressure. Paul Felder was on top of him, landing some nasty ground and pound. And, at points, it does look like Charles Oliveira's heart's in question. But when he's offensive and he's worrying about what he's doing, he seems to be unstoppable. It's just when he's kind of absorbing damage or on the wrong end of some positions, you really start to question about his success at the top end of the sport. But Kevin Lee at 8,300, I'm expecting Kevin Lee to be able to survive standing up, do well standing up. I don't think he's going to really have too much of a problem against Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira is a little bit sneakier, kind of reminiscent to Tony Ferguson, where he's a little bit tricky, throwing elbows, Muay Thai, good low kicks. But Kevin Lee has that top pressure where I feel like he could get on top of Charles Oliveira, and as long as he avoids the submissions, Charles Oliveira is super slick. I think that he can really put Oliveira in some bad spots, lay some heavy ground and pound, even potentially get a submission just from the accumulation of damage and making Charles Oliveira move to a position where he just wants out. And I'm going to be back in Kevin Lee. He's going to be a staple in my lineup at 8,300.
Yeah, when you look at the 2 times that Kevin Lee has gone 5 rounds in the UFC, one was a win, one was a loss. In the win against Edson Barboza, he got 164 points. He landed 142 significant strikes and 4 takedowns. And then his other fight that he went the distance against Ally Quinta, he lost that one, but he scored 75 points when he had 102 significant strikes and 3 takedowns. And of course, we saw he move his training camp after moving from Vegas. Now at TriStar, just a unreal knockout he had against Gregor Gillespie. Did not see that one coming. I was part of the Gregor Gillespie fan club because look, in MMA DFS, it is about going and getting those takedowns. That was Gregor Gillespie, but man, he timed that well. To me, and the price point 8,300, it makes it, because we'll talk about this later on. I'm not a big fan of the 9,000 salary, and I think that another thing to point to is with all the sports that are being canceled, there's going to be a lot of people playing this fight card on Saturday. So I think that fighters like Renato Moicano and Amanda Rebus are going to be very popular, but I don't know if I see the value in those fighters. And of course, we'll talk about them later on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Kevin Lee is just as safe as they come. I know it's a dangerous fight for both fighters, but we've seen Kevin Lee look really unstoppable. And, think about what he did to Edson Barboza, where he's just taking him down and just laying some nasty ground and pound and just put on a beating. The one issue for Kevin Lee that I have is his cardio. So, say as the fight goes on and Charles Oliveira is given some resistance, like maybe Kevin Lee starts to fade and Oliveira picks it up and gets a sneaky submission towards the end of the fight. So that's always a possibility with somebody as slick as Charles Oliveira. But I really think that Kevin Lee is going to make a statement here and hopefully live up to the hype of potentially fighting Khabib one day.
One of the things that we always talk about when we're breaking down the DraftKings salaries is there's fights that you just kind of scratch out where you say, you know what, I'm just not interested in that fight. And the co-main event is one of those fights for me. Damian Maia 7,200 taking on Gilbert Burns at 9,000. Damian Maia, he can make this kind of a grueling fight to where it doesn't really allow Gilbert Burns to kind of score at a high rate. And also, if Damian Maia, rolls his way to a 15-minute decision, it may not get you a lot of points. I would relate this to, think of Luis Pena a couple weeks ago
Yeah.
when he was able to just control the fight on the ground, but he wasn't scoring any points. So to me, this just is a scratch out fight for me. Like if I was going to play a side, I'd probably go Damian Maia.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have a little ownership for both sides, but for the most part, I'll be avoiding this fight, and it's because they really kind of cancel each other out. Their styles are so similar, similar in a way that they're both dominant grapplers. Damian Maia is a suffocating pressure type of jiu-jitsu guy who has unbelievable takedowns and submissions. Gilbert Burns has that in his back pocket as well. He's a great submission artist, but also has some great Muay Thai. And working with Henry Hoof, you're really seeing the transformation in the style. Has excellent hands, good kicks, just overall great kickboxing. And he's really, as of late, fallen into love with his kickboxing. And you haven't really seen too many highlights of his ground game, but let me tell you, it's legit as it comes. But there are levels to this game, and I know Gilbert Burns is a black belt and a highly decorated one, but Damian Maia is a highly decorated black belt, but I think he's on another level. And you bring it to the fact that he's accustomed to fighting at this higher weight class. Gilbert Burns, it has been moving up from 55 to 70. So he's somewhat getting acclimated to the weight class. In my opinion, Damian Maia has fought Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington. I mean, you're talking about big guys with pressure styles. I think Gilbert's going to want to keep it on the feet. I really don't think Gilbert's going to want to try to get down on the mat and trade positions on the ground with Damian Maia. I would say Gilbert Burns technically has the striking advantage. He looks crisp, very explosive, knockout power. Whereas Damian Maia has that little sneaky striking where he was even catching Anderson Silva, where he's just a little sneaky and he actually looks pretty good. He's a southpaw, but usually resorts to straight punches and dives for the leg. So we've seen Damian Maia struggle with getting that takedown. And Gilbert Burns, he's crafty, but he's so explosive and wild that he could, leave himself a little susceptible to getting taken down. So, like you said, it's a fight that's somewhat of a headache for me. Gilbert Burns should get the W. He's up. He's on his way up in the division. He's the younger guy, but I just don't really see the best DFS performance. If he stops Damian Maia here to strikes, it's like the first time in like 8 years or something crazy like that. So that would definitely be a big feather in Gilbert Burns' cap for sure.
And if you go over to awesemo.com, Alex has got the projections up for this. And when you look at for UFC Brasilia and the odds of a finish for Gilbert Burns, you look at 23%, and for Damian Maia at 14%. I would say I agree with those numbers.
Yeah,
I think if the stoppage comes, I feel more confident it being Gilbert Burns by strikes. I mean, look, I can't see Gilbert Burns submitting Damian Maia.
No,
But if you tell me Damian Maia submits him, I believe that.
Yeah, I do agree with you there. And I think that's, I think we're looking at a decision here. And I don't know about you, but I'm not really a big fan of this card. I'm looking at this card and I see a bunch of decisions coming. Watch every fight go out and be a finish. But I don't know. This is one of the fights where I think it's just going to go to distance. It's not going to be, that best of a DFS performance for sure.
Yeah, I know in the YouTube chat, Thomas saying going to mostly fade the fight, some Burns for possible finish. I mean, look, if you're taking Burns, you have to think he's going to get a finish at 9,000.
Yeah, because it's not an easy matchup, and that's the thing. I mean, on paper, you kind of look at it and you see the similar records and everything, but like for DraftKings, there's a big difference between 9,000 and 7,200, and I really think it's going to be a close contest. And um, I think there's some better spots here, and I think this is the week where we're going to have a ton of remaining salary.
Yeah, we were kind of joking about that a little earlier. You might have a ton of remaining salary. Next up, we got Renato Mancanto, 9,400, moving up to 155 pounds, and he's taking on Damir Hadzovic at 6,800. You know, when I'm looking at some punt plays this week, man, Damir is a guy that really jumps out to me.
Same, man. And I don't know what's going on, but I mean, you look at Renato Moicano coming off of two back-to-back losses and knockouts, one to Jose Aldo and then one to Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie. So it's like Renato Moicano kind of really fell from a very high spot. If you think about his performances, and he's got wins over Cub Swanson, Calvin Cater, lost against Brian Ortega via guillotine, but like at moments, Renato Moicano really looked excellent. Good low kicks, good striking, nice scrambling ability, good jiu-jitsu. He looked like one of the next big challengers, and I was wrong. Think that he performed better against Jose Aldo, and he did not. In this fight against Damir Hadzovic, man, Demir's a big guy, and Demir's pretty good everywhere. I would say that Renato Moicano has the jiu-jitsu advantage and the volume advantage, whereas Damir looks like the stronger guy. And he's the more average guy, but he's kind of average in every department where he doesn't do too many things bad either. You know what I mean? Like he's not like leaving himself exposed, whereas Renato Moicano's defense sometimes gets him in trouble. I like 6,800 Damir Hadzovic, and that's pretty crazy for us to like a 6,000 option. I'm not saying that he's going to go out there and get a finish. I think that he could pay off his salary and get a decision, get the nod over Renato Moicano. I'll obviously avoid the fight too, but paying 9,400 for Renato Moicano, coming off of back-to-back losses, knockout losses, and thinking that he's going to bump up a weight class and do better, that's a big task. So I don't know. I'm probably going to be fading that 9,400 price tag.
Oh, it's a fade to me, and you're kind of hoping that there's going to be a lot of players that maybe don't normally play UFC, and they just look at that 9,400 and they say, "Oh, that guy's got to go out there and get a finish."
Right.
Hanato's got to get a first round finish for that to pay off. I can't, I don't see a 15-minute decision where he pays off that 9,400.
I don't either, unless he really, picks up his volume and starts to like land a ton of leg kicks and maybe even try to get the fight to the mat and gets a knockdown or a takedown. But like Damir has that power, and Damir has some good wins in the UFC. So, like I said, Damir for me in some lineups, and I'll be avoiding Moicano in 9,400.
Then we've got a light heavyweight matchup: Johnny Walker taking on Nikita Krylov. Johnny Walker 8,600, Krylov 7,600. I was telling Pete earlier today, I said, this is a fight that in terms of the big GPPs, I don't think this is necessarily a must play in cash, but I think in terms of GPP, I think this is a fight that you have to have the winner in the fight. I think you have, and like Johnny Walker now at TriStar, how much of a difference are we going to see with him? When he had that loss, he really blamed everyone around him. The entire coaching staff goes up the TriStar. Nikita Krylov has been here. I mean, but the one thing was when Nikita gets finished, it's by submission, not knockout.
I was thinking the same thing. And when you have Johnny Walker, who loses the bout to Corey Anderson, it had so much hype behind him, and then blames everybody but himself, doesn't take responsibility. That's a little worrisome for me. And it's not like he has a cakewalk of a matchup. Nikita Krylov really has looked excellent since coming back to the UFC. I mean, he's been his past three fights, he's 1-2 in his past three fights. It dropped a split decision to Glover. Look at Glover. Glover's insane. He's really talented everywhere. Has a win over Ovin St. Preux, so OSP. And then dropped a fight to Jan Blachowicz. But who hasn't Jan beaten? Like, Jan's looked incredible. And outside of those three fights, I understand why people are backing Johnny Walker at 8,600. But my issue with Johnny Walker is, what does Johnny Walker look like outside of round one? Or outside of, let's say minute 14 or minute 13, if the fight's not going his way, you're not always going to be, in advantageous positions, or you're not always going to be, dominating your opponents or getting quick finishes like he has, whereas 15 seconds, 36 seconds, that's not going to happen. So what happens when somebody gives him some resistance? And Nikita Krylov likes to strike. he's good and he's good everywhere. And like you mentioned, his losses have been primarily on the ground. Early on his career, he's got stopped by strikes one time. So, and it's all about how he responds off the after that knockout loss too. So Johnny Walker, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him in this bout, and for me, I like the 7,600 price tag on Nikita Krylov. Call me crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I feel like you got to have the winner in this win
Yeah.
GPP. The problem is, I think this is a very risky fight to take in cash because the loser may only get 5 points.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And the thing is, like with Johnny Walker, you know what he's doing. He's going to go out there and he's going to try to get it done early. So obviously, I'll have some lineups with Johnny Walker. I'm not telling you to full fade him at all because his resume. He has some quick wins. I mean, a 36-second win over Misha Serkinov, a 15-second win over Justin Ledet. He had that beautiful elbow knockout against Khalil Roundtree at 157. So the guy likes to finish, and sometimes you're either a finisher or you're not. And Johnny Walker is fortunate to call himself a finisher. For me, though, I'll be leaning a little bit more towards Krylov's side.
Yeah, you look at Johnny Walker scoring 105 against Roundtree, 103.5 against Ledet, 102 against Serkinov, and then of course only getting that half point against Corey Anderson. The last time you have to go back to that Herman fight for Nikita Krylov. Last time he scored over 100 points, but to me, I think it's a fight that, in terms of GPP, I think you have to roster. Then we've got Francisco Turnaldo, 8,900, taking on John Makdessi at 7,300. This is one of those fights where I think Francisco Trinaldo is going to win. I just don't know if he's going to score enough for that 8,900 price tag.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the pressure of Francisco Trinaldo should edge out Makdessi. I think they're both going to have moments in this fight, and I think this fight is a very close fight. Makdessi has looked better, and coming from a new camp now, he's got some value there at 7,300. I mean, he has the value. I mean, all it takes is one shot to drop somebody, and then start to pour on the pressure. But when it comes to Francisco Trinaldo at 8,900, he really just gives everybody trouble, and everybody seems to have a problem with him. I just don't really see the best DFS performance from either one of them. I know on paper it looks like Trinaldo should go out there and TKO Makdessi at the 8,900 price tag. Could it happen? Absolutely. I'll probably be leaning a little bit more towards Trinaldo's side, like a 60-40 for me, because I really think that is closer than people think. Makdessi's not a bad fighter at all and seems to really have turned a corner in his career.
Yeah, the one problem that you have in terms of Francisco Trinaldo is he's a decision guy. You have to go back to 2015 against Shane Campbell,
Mhm.
the last time we went out there and got a stoppage victory. His last 4 wins all coming by decision. I think it's most likely going to be a decision win for him here. But to me, it's all about. I think you take Trinaldo, but it's just I think the fear is that he doesn't get enough of a score for you. Then we got a flyweight matchup: Jussier Formiga 8,800 taking on Brand Moreno 7,400. I know you kind of like the Brand Moreno side in this one.
Yes, sir, I do. I mean, I like Brandon Moreno. I've really been following his career. I'm happy he's in the UFC. I think this is a nice spot for him to really climb up the rankings. And I think that he's really taken off since being back in the UFC. I mean, the value on him at 7,400 is crazy. I liked his previous performance against Kai Kara France. And if you look at what Kai Kara France is doing in the UFC, I mean, the guy's looking like a killer. He's going out there and looking pretty impressive and getting nice decision wins, but also some TKOs. So I really like Brandon Moreno here. 7,400 going up against Jussier Formiga, who's just coming off of a knockout loss to Joseph Benavidez. I think this is the nice value play I'm looking for on this card. You have to find one or two 7,000 options, and I think that Brandon Moreno is my 7,000 option. It's not an easy fight. Formiga's nasty when it comes to jiu-jitsu and taking
Mhm.
your back and really just getting into good positions. So at 8,800, I understand the price tag. It's based on his resume and not by recency bias. Whereas Brandon Moreno seems like he's climbing up, and the fight against Askar Askarov was close. He's just looking good, and I like the momentum behind him. I like his aggressiveness too. And when rounds aren't going his way, he's still in the fight. So he's not like going to wilt or fold or look for a way out. Brandon Moreno really seems game from minute 1 to minute 15 in the fight. Like he wants to go out there and get the finish, and his aggressiveness and anger in a way is good. And he's not bad at, on the ground at all. He's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. So brown belt going up against a black belt. I think Brandon Moreno's better on the feet, and he could really, reverse some bad positions. Give me Brandon Moreno at 7,400.
Yeah, this is another fight. I just like there's a lot of fights in this car. Like you don't feel like super confident. Like, we
Mhm.
always talk about who's that fighter you're building your DraftKings lineup around. It's probably Kevin Lee for me.
Same. It is for me too, and that's crazy because it's not an easy fight for Kevin Lee. But I just think the style of it, like his ground and pound style and the pressure style, can really make Charles Oliveira break.
Of course, if you're watching us live on YouTube, if you got a question, leave it in the comment section. Also, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. We got a female matchup, Amanda Rebus, 9,300, taking on Ronda Marcos, 6,900. This is the thing about Ronda Marcos is she's a trended fighter. And what I mean by that, it's win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, rinse and repeat. She's coming off a win.
So she's due. Yeah.
She's due for this is, if she is going to, if she's going to win,
Yep.
I think she's going to have to make it a grindy type fight. I think it's a fight that she's got to probably take up against the fence, make this a clinch fight, get the fight to the ground. Amanda Rebus trains out of American Top Team. Should be noted, one of her teammates, one of her training partners, Maria Moroz, who's early on in this card, so they've been training together. They both trained with Yahya Tkachenko, who we saw last week. So, I mean, to me, I think it's either you take Rebus or pass. But once again, I look at, like, I talk about Hinato Mancano. Is she going to score enough to justify that salary?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Rebus is priced up because of her performance against Mackenzie Dern, and the fact that she really went out there and performed well against, possibly the highest touted prospect for the female division. Mackenzie Dern, like, she's incredible when it comes to jiu-jitsu. Obviously, she was coming off of a layoff and everything. So I really don't know about this price tag of 9,300 of Amanda Rebus going up against Reina Marcos at 6,900. I will have a few lineups with Reina Marcos, and the reasoning behind that is she's always in a close fight. And if you look back on her career, she drops a lot of decisions, but she's not really somebody that's going to go out there and get finished. She was finished by Rose Namajunas on the show. But besides that, Reina Marcos at 6,900, she fights to the level of her opponent. So, like, in that Claudia Gadelia fight, there was a staring contest. They really didn't have much activity at all. But what I mean by that is if it's a high tempo fight, Reina Marcos usually matches it. She needs to really be the one that dictates the pace and the pressure of the fight, and I think she'll really have a little bit more success. I'm going to root for her, and I'm going to hope that she does it. But it's a fight for me where I think that you should tread lightly at that 9,300 price tag of Rebus. Rebus on paper should go out there and get a nice win over Randa Marcos, but it's closer than what the price tags are saying at 93 versus 69.
And it should be noted that Ronda Marcos is a late replacement fighter, as Rebus was initially scheduled to take on Paige Van Zandt in this spot. So something to pay attention to there. Kingslayer, saying that he wants this MMA strategy show every week. We're going to be here every week. So
Right.
the UFC, obviously the coronavirus is affecting a lot of sports, but everything that you hear right now is while the UFC hasn't put out an official statement, it does appear everything is going to be status quo for them. Obviously, I think they're going to be moving some venues. It's been reported the Portland show in April is being moved to Vegas at the UFC Apex. I think that's probably what's going to happen with UFC 249. I know everyone wants to see Tony and Khabib. I think that's likely you're looking at the UFC Apex there, especially with what's going on in New York State. So, all signs point to the UFC, but it's a developing situation you have to pay attention to. We should have a good night of fights on Saturday night. I think those top four fights are really good fights. Then we got Zaleski dos Santos, 8,400, taking on Alexi at 7,800. Is this one of those fights that we have to roster?
I feel like this one might be more than the other one, and the reason is because I think that the Walker and Krylov fight, I have a funny feeling it's going to go to a decision. It's not going to be the best score. Could be totally wrong on that, but when I tell you about ownership, Zaleski dos Santos at 8,400 might be the second or third most popular fighter on the card. And the reason is, if you look at his DraftKings history, he's really performed and really going out there and got nice finishes over his opponents. People see Alexei Tkachenko at 7,800 and they think that you're preying on the weak right here. But let me tell you that Zaleski dos Santos has some holes in his game, and it's defensively. So, as great of a fighter as you are offensively, you have to be responsible for yourself and for your defense. And there are moments where we've seen him get clipped, and that the biggest moment is his previous fight against Li Jingliang, where he got caught and was kind of getting outworked and outclassed that whole fight. And it was a little worrisome because he's such a decorated grappler as well, that he's one of these guys that has fallen in love with his hands. And once you get that knockout, that one first knockout, you get like addicted to it. And we find that happen to wrestlers or highly touted BJJ guys, whereas they start to fall in love with their hands and they forgot what got them to the show. And in this case, I think that that could be a little bit of trouble going up against Tkachenko at 7,800, man. And Tkachenko, former champion, has a big record of 20-1 going up against Zaleski, who's 21-6. Tkachenko dropped a fight to Thiago Alves. But let me tell you, like, he has power in his hands and he's aggressive, especially if he gets on top. So I can see, one exchange and Tkachenko getting the better of him and then finishing him. So everybody's going to be on Zaleski dos Santos. And I think that this could be an opportunity to buy low on Tkachenko with limited ownership. So I'm going to go like 60-40 for Tkachenko versus dos Santos.
As you talk about fighters sometimes fall in love with their hands, makes me think about a year ago.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at the Mohegan Sun on press row. You're fighting. And we had talked before. You're telling me, oh man, I'm going to go in there and strike. And then all of a sudden you start grappling.
Yeah, man. Let me tell you, what happens is sometimes when you're training for a fight, right? You're trying to really bring your levels up. So you're trying to improve your game. So you're working on your weaknesses so much. So say, a highly touted grappler is going to be working on his striking, say 5 days a week, whereas he already has that grappling in his back pocket. So every practice you're working on your weakness. And sometimes you go out there and want to show off your hard work, or just by habit, you go out there and you get into the spot where you're a little bit inferior and not where you're dominant. So, that's one of those moments right there, Jason Floyd. But it worked out, though. It worked out. So
I think I was so I remember I forget who I said next to it. I'm like, why is Pete grappling? Come on, Pete, strike with this guy.
yeah. Hey, the coaches and my pops gave me a little flack for that, but I get it, man. It happens to all fighters, and it's a learning curve, and that's why you go out there and you try to be better every single fight. So hopefully, Dos Santos has really learned his lesson, using his striking a little bit to set up his ground game. If he has that approach against Tkachenko, he can really have a lot of success because Tkachenko seems to struggle with takedowns. So if Dos Santos gets on top of Tkachenko, it could be a long night for him.
Something to mention in the comments, Kingslayer kind of asking about what this crowd's going to be like on Saturday. Yeah, there's going to be no fans in the building. There'll be media there. There'll be, essential personnel, but it's going to be kind of interesting to watch on television because I think you're going to hear a lot on that ESPN Plus broadcast. Of course, you like what you're seeing, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also subscribe to Awesemo here on YouTube, also on the podcast channel as well, in your favorite podcasting app. Be sure to, subscribe to the channel to get all of the Awesemo content. Of course, we are here every week to break down the UFC events. Enrique Barzola, 8,700. He's a guy that because of his wrestling, I'm always kind of circling him. And sometimes I watch him, I get frustrated because I'm like, come on, man, go for a little more takedowns. But he's got Yahya here at 7,500. And of course, going down to 35 for Barzola, that to me is kind of the question is, will he wrestle? If he wrestles, he could be a good score at 8,700.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I don't think he wrestles as much as you think, Jason. And the reason is because he's going up against Yahya, who is a world champion jiu-jitsu guy. And he's so talented when it comes to grappling and jiu-jitsu that one little mistake on the mat can leave you reversed or put in a bad spot by Yahya. And Hani's always searching for your legs as well, trying to get leg locks. So maybe you see more of a striking match than you think. Enrique Barzola has a nice pressure style where he strikes enough to get those takedowns and kind of rinse and repeat and really get you a lot of points. But in a matchup like this, why would you welcome the threat? And why would you take Yahya down other than trying to pass his guard or get into a dominant position and lay some heavy ground and pound similar to his teammate Habib Nurmagomedov? That would be the only way. I mean, but you're really welcoming the danger with Yahya, and I've seen Yahya, reverse some nice positions. So at 7,500, he's a nice punt play because all it takes is one little mistake, or he pulls guard and gets Barzola on top of him where he wants, and then he's able to sweep or look for a submission. So 8,700 Enrique Barzola should be able to outstrike Yahya at will. Should be able to defend takedowns. The only nice takedown I saw Yahya have was a head outside single. So it's a little bit of an unorthodox technique because he really dives for that leg and throws his shoulder into that takedown. He's not really shooting double legs. But on the flip side of that, we have seen Yahya struggle. We've seen him not be able to get the fight to the mat. And if Barzola is able to sprawl and brawl and keep it on the feet or end up in good positions, it could be slightly reminiscent of Yahya's fight against Ricky Simon, where Simon was just, muscling him. So Barzola 8,700 is a guy I'm circling. He should be the bigger guy. He should be be able to do whatever he wants to him. The only thing is, how does the weight cut affect him that he's going to a lower weight class now? Will he be drained? Will he be tired? Obviously, you'd like to think that he's going to just dominate everybody at that new weight class, but there's also the other side of the coin where you have to think about cardio for sure.
2015. Last time Barzola got a stoppage, that was on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America reality show. 9 straight decisions for him.
Yeah, and I kind of see the same thing happening, unless he really puts Yahya in a bad spot and kind of like traps his hand and gives him that little handcuff position, and just starts laying some heavy ground and pound. I mean, he does train with Habib Nurmagomedov. That would be a perfect little addition to his fighting style if he was to implement that little wrist trap and then just put him in bad spots. So I hope he's been working on that. You like Barzola in this fight, right?
I do like Barzola, but the thing is decision. He should win this fight. There's a reason he's priced at the price point he's at. Yeah. But it's always that fear of when you're talking about fighters who are in that 8,600, 87, 88, 89 and above. I'm always that fear of, man, if they don't just score enough, can they maximize that point on their salary?
Yeah, I totally agree. But wouldn't you rather plug in Barzola in at 8,700 than reaching for some of these 9,000 options? Like, I don't know, Amanda Ribas at 9,300, Renato Moicano at 9,400. I would much rather take this little middle approach and take Enrique Barzola and kind of load up on these 8,000 options.
We're going to talk about the tiers towards the end, but to me, it's all about looking at that tier 2 of the 8,000 range. And I think that could be the core of your lineup. Then we got a female matchup, Marina Moroz, 7,700, taking on Silva, 8,500. Moroz, she's moved over to ATT and now up a weight class as well. I mean, look, you got to get better every day when you're training with Joanna and Jacek. She's another fighter on this card, and we talk about it, every week on this show. The one thing you're always fearful in women's fights is that when you look at the over under number of 2.5 rounds, the numbers it ranges between I think 63 and 65% of the fight going over 2.5 rounds. So that's always kind of your fear in the female fights. I kind of, Maria Moroz, I think now being at American Top Team, I think is someone to look at.
Yeah, I mean, initially I was looking at her at 7,700. The one thing is that finishing ability, and she really doesn't seem to go out there and try to end the fight immediately. She's always there. She's present. She's competing. So I don't think that she's going to get outclassed by too many people. But it's that little lack of aggressiveness. She throws nice jabs, good hand combinations. She actually has some decent takedowns as well. But I really just look at the other side of the fight in Bueno Silva at 8,500, and I see like a hunter, and that's kind of the fighters that I want in my lineups. I want fighters that are going to be hunting for or for finishes. And even though she's at 8,500, I like her in this spot. It's a tough fight, and I think that Marina Moroz has made some adjustments, and she looks better since she's been at ATT. But Bueno Silva, it seems to be hunting submissions or stalking and really in your face trying to knock you out with a nice right hand. So for me, I'll have lineups with 8,500 Bueno Silva and a few with Marina Moroz because I do think she comes from a great camp and has looked better since she's made that move.
Preferred in cash.
Yeah, you know what? I think so. I don't really see too much of a GPP upside for this matchup. I tell you, man, there's a lot of decisions. I am predicting a lot of decisions this week, and I'd be surprised if I was wrong.
Then we've got Bruno Silva, 8,200, taking on David Dvorak, 8,000. This is a fight that has my eyes. Me and Pete were going back and forth on this one today. And this is when I look at David Dvorak, yes, he is 17-3. He's making his UFC debut.
Yep.
But when you look at the strength of schedule in terms of who he's fought, not something that you're falling in love with. Now, he is coming off a win against a fighter who was 16-2 when they entered that fight. However, that fighter before that matchup, his last two wins came against fighters making their pro debut. Pete, when you got that many fights, you should not be fighting dudes in their pro debut.
Yeah, you know what though? I mean, they're overseas. Maybe there's limited competition. Maybe it's hard to find him fights. Obviously, they're just trying to build his record and get him to be one of the big guys to go into the UFC. Obviously, but on the other side of that, at 17-3, he does have 20 fights. So 20 fights are 20 fights, and his strength of schedule definitely hasn't been there. But the video that I have watched on David Dvorak, I like him. I like the fact that he gets finishes. I don't know if he gets a finish over Bruno Silva. Bruno Silva is going to be looking to take it to the mat and have that nice aggressive pin you against the cage, try to take you down, and that top pressure game plan. David Dvorak likes to stay on the outside, pop shot a little bit, and then reverse position off of defending takedowns. He'll defend a takedown and then really swim for those underhooks, reverse cage position, and start to work his game, and tends to take the back of a lot of his opponents as well. So at 8,000, man, I like David Dvorak despite the fact that it's his UFC debut. Bruno Silva has the experience coming from, the Ultimate Fighter, also fighting in the UFC. But, he had a nice performance against Khalid Taha until the very end, where he was surviving on the feet, but getting nice takedowns and taking Khalid Taha down. So Bruno Silva could take Dvorak down and really get some takedowns. So I know that we're highlighting both sides of it. I will be leaning more towards David Dvorak at 8,000. I think that he's just going to be a little bit too tall, too lanky, be able to defend the takedowns and get into better positions. Maybe he gets a late finish. Are you going to be back in Silva or Dvorak?
Silva.
Oh, okay. All right.
I remember training partner with Henry Cejudo, the Pitbull brothers.
Yep.
They're at Fight Ready there in Arizona. I mean, yes, he did lose against Taha, which you mentioned here. To me, I know who Bruno Silva is. I know who he is at the UFC level.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it is a buyer beware situation. Now, look, Dvorak may go out there and just knock him out in the first round, and I'm like, Pete, you got me on this one. But I look at this, I mean, to me, it's one of those lower 8,000 options. I really want to plug in at least one lineup.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'm going to have some Bruno Silva as well. I wish his training camp would translate a little bit more into his fights. Whereas, he trains with some high caliber fighters. Maybe this is the fight where he goes out there and really just shows, like, hey, David Dvorak, this is the UFC. Here's a nice warm welcome. And that could happen. And I think that Bruno Silva is the safer of the two. And by saying that, I think that he's kind of he's welcoming a new guy. And there's so much UFC jitters and everything involved in a big UFC fight. So I'll have some Bruno Silva at 8,200. I think the upside there for David Dvorak at 8,000. I think that he's like a nice GPP play.
Yeah, one of the comments from Thomas, it would be nice to know if Dvorak was quarantined, how long to get out of Europe. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about these Saturday UFC cards, typically if the fire's not coming in earlier, maybe to get adjusted to the time difference, they're coming in on a Monday or a Tuesday. So, really not sure about that. This comes another question. If you are doing two lineups, would you roster Silva in one lineup and Dvorak in the other? I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, why not? They're lighter guys, so the problem with doing that is it's 125 pounds. You don't necessarily get the most finishes in that weight class. It's kind of the most. It's similar to the female fights where I feel like you see more distance fights going to go 15 minutes. So I typically try to avoid that 125 unless it's a big fight like we had Figueiredo a couple weekends ago. But that's not a bad strategy. I mean, if especially if you're intrigued with the matchup and you think that a finish is coming, definitely play both sides. It's a fight. All it takes is one mistake and the fight's over for sure.
Hey, remember, some people may remember Bruno Silva if you follow LFA. He had that draw against Casey Kenny. I don't know if I would necessarily think that he won the fight. I thought Casey Kenny won that fight. And of course, we've seen what Casey Kenny has gone on to do in the UFC. And then our opening fight of the night is Veronica Macedo, 9,100, taking on Bay Malecki, 7,100. We talked about it last week on the show. And of course, you've been watching this for a long time. I never go with the first fight of the night. It's my golden rule. I just don't do it. There'll be like, one out of maybe like 10% of the cards. I'll take the opening fight of the night. I took Sean Brady a couple weeks ago, but rarely am I going to do it. But if I was going to do this one, Pete, I think you look at Malecki at 7,100.
Oh my gosh. Can you imagine actually like putting money on the line and putting Malecki in your lineup? Geez. Uh it's a tough fight. And the reason it's tough is because Malecki's staring you in the face at 7,100 and she holds a lot of advantages over Veronica Macedo. I believe she holds a 10-inch reach advantage, which is extremely significant. Macedo seems to be moving up a weight class. At 9,100, she's priced like she's going to go out there and really get rid of Bay Malecki. And the pricing is based on their records. So if you look at Macedo, she's 6-3, going up against Bay Malecki, who's technically 1-0, but was on the Ultimate Fighter. So, like, that's what this DraftKings line is based on. And Bay Malecki has the advantage, with the reach. She has a good gym. With Fortis, I really, I don't want to say roster Bay Malecki, but I'll definitely have a few lineups with Bay Malecki because she's a former Muay Thai champion going up against Veronica Macedo, who has excellent kicks, unbelievable taekwondo. So she throws like highlight reel kicks, lots of round kicks, spinning back kicks, side kicks. She's the flashy of the two, and she's a black belt. So maybe she clips Bay Malecki and gets a quick finish via head kick into ground and pound. Because let me tell you, Macedo is aggressive, and if you watch her highlights or if you watch any of her fights, she really goes out there and she seems mean. So I like a mean fighter. Bay Malecki seems kind of like robotic, and she's super robotic, and she's okay, but has a good squeeze when it comes to taking the back and getting a rear naked choke. It's a toss up of a fight. It's a first fight. I'll probably be avoiding it for the most part. I think Macedo should go out there and win, to be honest, despite the reach advantage for Bay Malecki. But I understand the long shot call with Malecki at 7,100.
And something to pay attention to, we always talk about this, is the betting lines. When it opened up, Veronica was minus 225. She's now minus 165. On the other side, Malecki was plus 175, so she's now plus 145. So it tells you what the betting public thinks of this fight. So I think it's something to pay attention to. But let's wrap up this show by talking about the tiers. First off, tier 1 is the 9,000 fighters. So that's Moncano, Rebus, Macedo, and Burns.
I hate them all.
I don't love him. I'm fading Moncano. I think he's going to be highly owned. I really believe he's going to be highly owned. So I'm fading him. I think he could win, but he's now at 55. This isn't at 45. And you mentioned about, the knockout, defeats coming off. Burns probably gets to win. I just don't know if he scores much. So I don't really love anyone in that tier 1.
Yeah, same. I usually don't hate the 9,000 options. And this week, I might fade all four. Gilbert Burns of that group possibly has the highest upside, and the reason behind that is because of his knockout ability. And he goes out there and has the striking advantage against Damian Maia for sure. I just don't know if he gets it done.
Yeah.
Macedo against Malecki, it's a soft competition. So on paper, she should go out there and just really piece Malecki apart, and her kick should be the difference. Rebus going up against Marcos, that's a close fight. And Moicano, I'm full fade. And Moicano, he's my least favorite of the four.
Looking at tier two, I do want to mention a question we got in relate to Kevin Lee. It says, can we talk about Kevin Lee and Charles Oliveira a bit? That's one match I'm expecting a definite knockout. I don't know if I would say definite knockout. I would think that, I like, we both talked about, we like Kevin Lee in that spot. The 8,300 price, you got to love. But Charles Oliveira is a DFS stud. But that if he's going to score, to me, he's winning by stoppage in the first or second round. I think the longer that fight goes, the more it favors Kevin Lee. That's why Kevin Lee is a guy I'm building all my lineups around.
Yeah, I'm building my lineups around Kevin Lee as well at 8,300. I think the value's there. I really don't see either one of them knocking each other out on the feet. I mean, even talk about Charles Oliveira. I'd be very, very surprised if Kevin Lee got knocked out by him. I think that Charles Oliveira could submit him. Absolutely. That's what he's good at. He really hunts the neck and really has great pressure. Paul Felder had to really withstand a lot of submission attempts from Charles Oliveira to survive and get into a top position and start to drop big punches and elbows in order to get the finish. For me, man, I think Kevin Lee could get the TKO finish, and I think that's after some takedowns, some striking exchanges, some positional changes, and a late TKO. I'm thinking like round 4 for Kevin Lee at 8,300.
Yeah, in terms of the rest of those 8,000 options, I like Bruno Silva. Walker Krylov. Walker's at 8,600. I think you got to have the winner of that in GPP. I don't think that's a cash game play. I see a lot of decisions with those fighters, though.
I'm telling you, man, I think it might be a record weekend of decisions, and I'd be very, very surprised to see what some of the odds are on finishes for some of these fights. Turnaldo should go out there and edge out Makdessi. I kind of like him there because, we've seen Makdessi get clipped and hurt and rocked before. So maybe Turnaldo's aggressiveness could result in a late TKO, like a second or third round. So I don't hate him there at 8,900. I don't like Formiga at 8,800. Walker has a great resume, and you're either going to get a first round finish from Johnny Walker, or he's probably going to lose against Krylov. I like Krylov in the matchup. So my favorite in the 8,000 is Barzola. I think that he's going to be too big for Yahya. Could get some takedowns, some ground and pound, maybe wrist traps. Let's hope. Imagine if they really institutes that in his game plan. That'd be nice. So I'd say Kevin Lee, Barzola, and David Dvorak. That hurts me to say. That really hurts me to say. But honestly, these 8,000 options are a little ugly.
Yeah, those 7,000 options. For me, I do look at Malecki at 7,100. I know you like Moreno. I think you got to look at Krylov, Moroz. But I think Brandon Moreno is probably the one that sticks out to you more than anybody else.
Yeah, man. At 7,400, I'm going to be rostering Brandon Moreno and Kevin Lee. That's going to be like two guys I'm going to plug in and build my lineups around. And I don't know if he goes out there and gets the best DFS performance, but he's somebody I somewhat feel comfortable about. And, whenever it comes to a UFC card, you always want to find fights or fighters that you feel comfortable about. And that kind of makes it easier rather than just trying to find the finishes. Just back the people that you like in the fights, and then you'd be surprised that sometimes they get the finish. So Moreno's my one. I would say my two would be Alexei Kunchenko at 7,800.
Okay.
I think he's significantly overlooked. I think that Dos Santos, lacks some defensively. If Dos Santos goes the grappling route, he could pose problems for Kunchenko, but Kunchenko could hit him with a counter right hand and drop him or wobble him with a leaping left hook. And that's kind of what I'm seeing happen. And then Krylov would be my third at 7,600 because I think you want to drag Johnny Walker to deep waters, man. If you can get Johnny Walker outside of round 1, all those explosive movements and everything, he's going to just be so taxed on his body and he's going to be exhausted. I would like to see Krylov get the upset win over Johnny Walker.
Then we look at tier 4. Yeah, Ronald Marcos is a straight passer. We talked about it earlier. The trend is if the trend stays true, she's going to lose here. But Demir at 6,800, I think he may be the punt play of the week.
I think he's in the conversation, and I think that he can definitely go out there and edge out Moicano. And then say he even loses to Moicano at 6,800, he might score decent because I expect it to be a standing affair. I'd be surprised if Moicano's just started shooting for takedowns. But Hadzovic at 6,800, I think he's playable. I do. I think it's a winnable fight. It's harder. It's harder than people think, especially Moicano coming off of back-to-back knockout losses. And actually, Randa Marcos, I don't hate her either. I'm not going to roster her in too many lineups, but she's always in close fights. I know that she just won her previous fight, so she's probably going to drop this one. But that's a winnable fight too, and I don't really understand the salaries on that. So the 6,000 options for once actually aren't bad options. So I can't really fault you if you have like you really feel comfortable with a lot of people. But this week there's so much salary left over. I really feel like you can roster everybody you want and feel comfortable about it.
You know, when Demir does lose, he does get taken down. You look at the Alan Patrick fight, taken down 9 times. You look at the fight against Christos Giagos, was taken down 6 times. So that would be your one fear, is that he does constantly get taken down. But I'm looking forward to watching the fights on Saturday. It's going to be an interesting environment with no fans in the building. You know, that's going to be very interesting. Of course, be sure to give a thumbs up to this video. Ever have a question, comment, tweet at myself or Pete. We will get back to you. Of course, also be sure to check out the Awesemo podcast channel. Subscribe to that channel to get all the content here from awesemo.com. Pete, anything you want to get out here before we get out here for this week's episode?
No, I hope the fights go on. I really do. I have to corner one of my fighters on Saturday night, so in Massachusetts. So I'm curious if that's still going to happen. For the sake of him, I hope it happens. He put in a lot of hard work, so I totally understand the Bellator and UFC fighters. They want to go out there and put on a performance. So if you are available Saturday night, it'd be nice if you could support the fighters and tune into the fights. Maybe the UFC will help them out a little bit. And since there's not going to be anybody in attendance, I think that's the best way we can try to support them, is just by viewing the fights.
We'll get one last question. Someone asked about Damian Maia. The problem I think with Damian Maia is, I mean, at 7,200, it's a low salary. I just don't know what the ceiling is for his score. Is a ceiling, I guess he gets a first round submission. It's obviously 100 points, but I feel like the most likely ceiling for him is in that 70, 75 range.
Yeah. And he'll pay off at that salary if he gets that. So that's not a problem. It's just, it's not like we like the 9,000 options. So, you know what I mean? There's really no reason to roster somebody that cheap in a dangerous matchup going up against Gilbert Burns, where he could get knocked out. I think there's other fighters that are in that 7,000 range that have some upside, and even the 6,000 fighters. But you talk about Damian Maia, there's levels to this game. I think that he could school Gilbert Burns if it becomes a grappling contest. But what happens if Gilbert Burns just forces him to stand? Like, what happens then? Like, Damian Maia is a little sneaky standing up, but I think Gilbert Burns can find his chin and put him to sleep if it's a standing affair. We'll see. We'll see, right?
And pay attention to the weigh-ins tomorrow. See how fighters look on the scale. Obviously, if there's any changes, how that might affect your lineup as well for UFC Brasilia. Of course, entire fight card will be on ESPN Plus. So appreciate everyone tuning in this week for the MMA DFS show, strategy show. Of course, shout out to Super Draft for sponsoring the show, and they'll be back soon. So that's going to wrap it up for the MMA DFS strategy show with the fighter, Pete Rogers Jr. Of course, I am Jason Floyd.